todos, me llamo Gwen y es parte 13 de mi proyecto. Para esta parte de mi video, presentaré una compañera de danza local en Atlanta. Estuvo incluida en un festival de danza donde otros bailarines y artistas contribuyeron con sus obras a las matemáticas en movimiento. La actuación tuvo entrevista con los otros artistas de espectáculo y se dijeron algunas respuestas interesantes. Matemáticas en movimiento fue una actuación. Esta actuación tenía flamenco. La actuación tuvo muchos estilos de baile y tuvo múltiples temas a lo largo de cada actuación. Una bailarín dice que la sesión de preguntas, position of the body affecting the outcome. Y otra bailarín dice the right amount of force to stay on my head and stay and build the speed. Y también él dice que él puede trascender la música para hablar otra lengua sin usar. Quiero entrevista ella y muy alegre para esta conversación. Bueno, voy a la conversación.
All right. I am Julie Baggenstoss, and I am a flamenco dancer, and I have been studying and teaching and performing this genre for about 25 years.
Wow. And so what's your background with mathematics and science in relation to this?
Okay, so in relation to dance specifically, I'm going to back up and say, for many years I've been working as a teaching artist, and so that means I use dance to teach curriculum standards in schools. Years ago, I wanted to try to develop more programming for math classes, and I was told this has to be legit math. It can't be kind of math or math inspired. It has to be legit math, or the math teachers aren't going to give you time in the classroom. So
interesting.
Yeah, so I kind of spent a lot of years on that journey, and then when I was in a graduate program for Spanish, one of my professors asked me as we walked into the classroom, what do you do? And I mentioned that I was interested in math, and she asked me, well, what do you do with math? And I was like, well, like fractions and stuff like that. And she said, and she walked off, and I went, oh, what do you know?
Oh my gosh.
She was completely unimpressed, as if there was, way more out there. So through her class, actually, just a couple of weeks later, she introduced the idea of the ellipse to us. In terms of fine art, and then also in literature. And so by seeing this shape and how the painters, and then later the writers, in particular a specific poet or two, manipulated things based on the maths of the ellipse, I really became intrigued, and I wanted to figure out how to embody that. Wow. And so that's how my relationship started, first from a professional need, and then through a very personal kind of shot across the bow. No, so most of the ideas that I've seen have come from the artists. And I always say that the most wicked mind is the artist who understands science or math or technology or any of these things, and vice versa, because they're seen in our world as being two completely different things, but they're completely related, and they're completely stacked on top of each other.
I'm very curious as to specifically what kind of movements, relating to flamenco, and how you present that dance piece. How, maybe an example of what you've taught recently, or a mathematical concept that was taught recently.
Okay, so I will take, let's take like on the kindergarten and first grade level. If we take just thinking about movement and asking the kids, what do they perceive when they see a movement? And so start them off with a question that says, I'm going to show you a dance. And while I dance, I want you to think about shapes. So when I'm finished dancing, I'm going to ask you a question. What shapes did you see while I was dancing? And then let them start there. And then so at that point, we're just talking about some really basic shapes. So in particular, this idea of the ellipse had the way that I attacked it the first time was to talk about asymmetry, which the ellipse is like really super balanced, but in terms of art, it has these two foci, and one will stand out and one will recede. And that is like so core to flamenco. And we do this rhythmically all the time. So without necessarily having to dance, because as the kids get older, they don't want to dance so much in their peer around their peer group.
Like, oh no.
Yeah, I know. Like you can see them like recede into the wall.
Yes.
So I like to use rhythm as a starting point there, and we have these contratiempos where if the downbeat is here, ba 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 ba, this is the ellipse. One stands out and one recedes, and so we can start to talk about how the ellipse is this special feature. But then it's also really pertinent for social studies and language.
I guess my next question would be more about the performance and the choreography that you've created for the recent Mathematics in Motion. I kind of wanted to know, you said a little bit about the ellipse before. How was creating that type of dance just kind of like, were the dancers understanding of the like mathematics behind it, or was it just kind of like, we're just doing the dance and moving forward?
Okay, we had a process by which, well, first of all, my goal was not to use a prop, if possible, because I didn't want to bring, like an ellipse, a cardboard ellipse, so to speak, on stage and just move it around the stage. Because to me, that's not really thinking and building through the math. It's just showing a prop so the audience can go, yeah, look, there's an ellipse on stage.
Right.
Okay. So that was one goal, and then the other goal was really to create a piece, or variations, movements in the piece that were based on the math, not that did show the shape of an ellipse. So rather than all of us standing in that shape and just moving on stage and varying it, we took apart the different concepts. And so let me think through this. The dancers were always aware of what math concept or what piece of a math concept we were working with as we created. And so I can give an example that one day a dancer said, hey, maybe I could come here and do this and then go stand here and do this. And I said, that's an awesome idea. But remember, we're trying to show these foci at this moment. So instead of going over here, could you put yourself on this point right here so that we can, maintain the math concept? And so then we reworked the sequence so that could happen, because he had a really good idea. And when we all set forth to do this project, that was like one of the guiding points that we would make decisions, number one, based on math. And then, so those were our guiding kind of our directions to help us make choices. Number one, math, and number two, humanities. Okay, so the dancers were aware, and every once in a while we had to remind ourselves, again, but then also we searched for movement and relationships between one another that supported the different, not just a concept, but a slice of a concept that we wanted to use to inform choices.
Yeah, I feel like that can really, I'm glad that you didn't bring just an ellipse on stage and we're like, oh, look at this. Because as a dancer who has done a lot of choreography work, I know that it can be really tempting to just be like face value. Let's use this concept. Let's put it in somehow. But really working through that art is it's so fascinating, both on the receiving end as the audience, and also I'm sure that you've created a lot of brain pathways because of using all this information in different ways. Um, so
Incredibly difficult process. It was very challenging. And there were a lot of days when I asked myself, resign, because it was super challenging. And I mean, there was always that fallback of, just put the ellipse on stage and dance around with the ellipse. There was always that as an option, so that you could deliver something, but to really be true to the guiding principles in the beginning there, like no props and use the math. It was super hard. I have been um, working on the overlap of flamenco and hip hop for a while. And so when I came into the project, I already had some ideas about where there were some intersections. I learned a lot about other intersections, new things that I had no idea about.
A lot about mathematics, but I kind of want to center it to physics. I know that it might be a little, what is this? But part of my project was to research about the angular momentum of a turn. And I know that you said you didn't use props, but I researched the menton in the use of the stir the pot, and how that really related to what I was researching in ballet, which was a flotte turn. And so basically the idea that I kind of came across was that the menton, with the extra like string at the end and how it's weighted differently, that is similar to how I weighted my project, and I used different weights to see if it would affect the angular momentum and change how I moved, which I found a clear, trend of saying like more weight, more angular momentum, the faster I spun. And so it was interesting to see that with the menton. I was wondering if you, felt while performing or even saw different moments where either you had the skirt or the any extra items or any body part really that was kind of in that physical concept of the turn being affected by some sort of extra, I guess, let's say.
Yes. Okay, so in this particular performance, we dealt with 1, 2, 3, vuelta de pecho.
Mhm.
And this one starts maybe in like fourth position over to the diagonal, and there's a contraction toward the side of the body where the leg is to the front, right?
Mhm.
And then you switch the contraction to the other side as you cross the back leg to the front. And then you make a quick, almost like a slicing turn back to the same position. And so this contraction moves across the body and then up through the chest and then back to the beginning position.
Wow.
So we're on camera, so I can go contraction through the body, up through the chest, back to the same position. So yeah, anyway,
It's
it's
like
a
your
quicker.
center of gravity is like changing when you do the contractions.
Exactly. It's almost like a barrel turn in tap dancing or jazz
Mhm.
and this kind of thing. But your arms also then are in this position,
Mhm.
um, up and then back down. Let's see if I'm here, 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 here. So the arms are
Wow.
changing at the same time. It always reminded me of a barrel roll, and it almost went to a butterfly.
Wow. I really think that that's super interesting because as a dancer, you're always taught about a plumb line. And so that
Yep.
separation of the body is definitely very interesting because not only do you have, the angular momentum of your lower half, your legs, whatever they're doing, but you also have this angular momentum, especially with that first turn you said that you have this stop and you have to have more, because you've already stopped in your lower half, you have to have more stop in your upper half.
Yeah.
So very, very interesting. And I know that it's really first it's almost like we know it, we know the physics of a dance, but we
Mhm.
just don't know like the terminology in terms of like a science, or like the physical concepts behind it. So it's really interesting that you can connect these like ideas with the turns and that there are multiple turns like that, and they're very interesting, they're multi-part, multifaceted. So just very, very interesting. And I guess more physical concepts. I know I talked about the falda flamenca, just in like terms of the shape of certain like ruffles and how that creates, the spiral. I know that that's really like visually. I guess you can really connect those two. Are there any other moments like with that movement, either with your body, what your body has to do to get the skirt to cooperate?
Yeah. I want to talk about specifically the bata de cola, which is the
Mm-hmm.
long train dress.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, um, the hips play a big role in this. And then going back to the idea of stopping the body and letting the skirt continue to move,
Mm-hmm.
you have to know if you want the skirt to stop on beat number 10, you have to stop whatever else you're doing long enough or early enough so that your skirt can get there on time. So it's a matter of timing. And then, also talking about this relationship of turns in there. If you want to kick that bata up off the ground and catch it backwards, you have to get the correct angle, and then the arm has to extend backwards to get the timing of the skirt from when you kick it to when your arm is there for it to fall on top of the arm and you
There's
pick it up.
also that trajectory aspect. You have to make sure that
Yes.
that gets
Yes.
there.
So the base de cola,
Mm-hmm.
it's curved,
Mm-hmm.
and I talk about 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7, 8, 9, and I tell people like you have to pick it up. You have to cross your leg behind your body and pick it up on this side, or use the other leg and pick it up on this side. It makes a difference as to where you're picking up the bata with your leg, and if you want it to move across the floor or a little bit up or really high up. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of information there, and it depends on whether you use the muscles like your quads and your knee, or your
Mm-hmm.
glutes, or a contraction with your hips in it. It really comes down to different muscle groups. I have
Yeah.
a fantastic teacher named Manuel Lignan who says, "Bata de cola is about positions." And
Mm-hmm.
so you have to know your position and then the position of the body and how you're going to manipulate that. So there's a lot of information there. And I also remind students when I'm teaching them, you have to dance the bata in class
Mm-hmm.
like you're going to dance it with the music because of that timing issue. And
Mm-hmm.
the bata works with movement and motion. And if you slow it down, and same thing with the manton that you were asking about,
Mm-hmm.
if you slow it down and say, oh, it's like this and then like this, the movement is lost. You have to make it go, and then it'll fly through the air.
Yeah. And I guess for a wrap up question, um, I guess this is kind of like if someone approached you and said mathematics, physics, and dance do not exist on the same plane, um, kind of what would you kind of say? Like, would you say like, no, this is why, or I can see why you say that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's really tough, because you don't want them to squirm away and just let you like you don't want them to dismiss you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that some of the most famous artists through time
Mm-hmm.
have achieved their level of accomplishment, their success,
Mm-hmm.
because they understood the math or the physics of their motion.
Mm-hmm.
And if you would take time to ask them, to give you a simple explanation of one thing that they do,
Mm-hmm.
then it would become very obvious.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is the same thing for those of us who don't have that same level of fame.
Yeah.
Not a Martha Graham, not a Picasso, not a Gongora, but that those of us who have the desire to say, to explore those connections, that we can definitely peel it away. And I would also question if some of these same mathematicians or scientists would care to dance.
Yes. Try
Then
dancing.
come dance with me, and by the end of give me a half an hour. By the end of
Mhm.
half an hour, I will have everyone in the room embodying math, and then they can talk about it in their words, just like those kindergartners and first graders. You
Yeah.
tell me, what shapes do you see? Because I'm going to ask you when I'm done dancing here.
That's beautiful. I love that because it's very much so you're connecting two worlds and you're allowing one person to look into the other, but using the same